Your lunch, those who had it, and actually I believe there will be some people who weren't here in the morning and are joining us for the afternoon session. So for them, I'm going to have to run again through the housekeeping bits. And by the way, my name is Laura, and I'm emceeing in replacement for Lucy, who is now chairing another session elsewhere, but she will return with us. So yeah, just quickly on the fire alarm, there's no fire alarm scheduled for today, so if it does go off, we will need to look into exiting this room via the fire exits, which are those three, with the signage. In terms of toilets, there are toilets at the exhibition road reception. There is one here at theatre, just as you come out, just straight into to the right and then to the left. And then basically there's another one on the main hall, mezzanine level, and that one is unisex, and the one outside the Dyson room is unisex and also for disabled. So if you do get lost, just make sure to find one of our volunteers, of our staff members. If you can just put your hands up, JB, team, and volunteers, so you make yourself visible. And in terms of the Wi-Fi information, as you can see there, there's a free Wi-Fi, it's open, it's just called Make Tomorrow to just go in there. And just to remind that there is someone with a severe nut allergy in the room in the event today, so please abstain from opening any package of nuts or anything. And I'm just going to leave you now with Lucia, who's going to introduce us to the next performance.
Hi, Lucia here, curator of general ecology at the Serpentine Galleries. For those of you who are joining us this afternoon, you're all extremely welcome. It's now a huge pleasure to introduce to you Climate Symphony, which is a project by Lea Borromeo, we know each other so many years, Lea Borromeo, Jamie Pereira, and Catherine Round. Lea and Jamie are going to tell you a little bit more about Climate Symphony, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank our performers, Roxana Albayati, James Douglas, and Alice Eldridge. So without further ado, Lea?
Clearly age before beauty here. So yeah, thank you all very much for attending to this. Thank you again to Dan, who's our wonderful sort of arranger, person who helped put this together, Catherine over there who's sitting, and Adrian, who's sort of in our midst, who also helped us with a lot of the data sonification, the Serpentine, Royal Geographic Society, Julie's Bicycle, and everybody who's kind of sort of come with us on this like strange journey. So Climate Symphony is a live music and visual performance that's created from data to tell the story of what climate change means through sound. So very briefly, what we have here isn't the full symphony, it's just a part called Oil, Coal, and Gas for 3 cellos. And so this is about the past 820 years of fossil fuel consumption in approximately 8 minutes, as told by 3 individual characters we have here. Jamie, who's infinitely more able to discuss how we've musically managed to put this together, should probably be able to tell us about this now.
Okay, so we sonify things. Sonifying an object to feel the issues and information within it is a small act in provoking conversation. And in doing this, it's now a way for us to confront, express, and experience the issues behind climate change, a practice that breaks down aspects of a seemingly impenetrable hyperobject. What is revealed is that whether we see it or not, we're all somewhere in the early stages of ecological grief, with links to consistent, inherited, systemic trauma. Most of us are in denial. Some are in depression, anger, pain, guilt, and so on. We're also trying our hardest to navigate change through muddy water while it keeps getting muddier, so it's difficult to know which way to turn. So how do we not become paralyzed? How do we get through to reconstruction? What's the process of getting to a place where we can respond? So I'd like to share our process with you. As I said, we sonify objects and data within climate change. And we've learned to listen with the goal of experiencing the emotion in the sound while contemplating the issues behind the data. So I'd like to encourage you to do that now. I'm very proud to present our commission piece for the Serpentine General Ecology Project. It's called Oil, Coal and Gas for Free Cellos, with James Douglas playing the voice of oil, Roxana Al-Bayati in the middle playing the voice of coal, and Alice Eldridge playing the voice of gas. Thanks for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much to the Climate Symphony for this mesmerizing performance. That was truly wonderful. So yeah, our next session is about movement building, which is very much sits at the heart of everything that we do at Julie's Bicycle. In fact, research that we published around 3 years ago tries to describe and capture, probably not in its entirety, the different roles and the diversity of the responses and approaches that the creative community is adopting in order to tackle this challenge of climate change. So, because we believe it's very important to make all of those approaches visible and to celebrate them, we thought that it would be impossible not to have a moment to hear all of those voices. So my colleague Farah, Ahmed, I don't know where she is. She's going to be chairing the next session, and she will be introducing all of the speakers. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy it.
I'm Farah Ahmed. I am the Events and Network Coordinator at Julie's Bicycle, and I'm here today with Sholeh Johnston, who is the Season for Change producer, and Noga-Levy Rapoport, who is from the UK Student Climate Network, and Kareem, who is a musician and a community organizer and a social activist. And for those of you who weren't in our sessions this morning, we also have an empty chair on the stage, which has been there to remind us of those not just people, but communities and species that can't be with us in the room and don't have their voices heard. So later on, when you're asking a question, maybe some of you have endangered species cards, please use those to voice what they might say. And I think it's also really important to remember who and what isn't in the room as we go into this panel talking about movements and collectivity and how and who we envision this new world engaging with, and how the arts can really, really create these visions for our future. So I'm going to start off by introducing Noga. Would you like to go first?
Right, can you hear me? That seems pretty positive. Yeah. Hi, my name is Noga-Levy Rapoport. I'm an organiser with the UK Student Climate Network and a youth climate activist. We've been the group responsible for organising the climate strikes across the UK and coordinating them internationally for the past year or so. And we were first founded in January 2019, and since our first kind of national strike on February 14th last year, we've snowballed to have the largest UK climate mobilisation on September 20th this year, which hopefully many of you would have heard about, which had 350,000 people come out onto the streets across the UK. And I think really the question here is kind of how do you build that kind of mass movement that centres the right voices, which you touched on. Who do we engage with, and how do we ensure that these kind of movements aren't built around existing power structures, but rather envision a better kind of future and proactively do so within the organisations that we work with. We started off in quite a almost corporate hierarchical structure within the organisation. Nearly all of us were under 18 at the time. And we started off with effectively about 20 people on a WhatsApp chat in a very kind of community organizing style of things, except we were spread out across the UK with no job and no money and no idea of where we wanted to take the organization. Since then, we've entirely revamped. We now work entirely horizontally in a process that we hope will ensure that the strikes we organize reflect the vision of the world we want to create, reflect the idea of how we organize around. For us, the solution is the global anti-imperialist, anti-extractivist Green New Deal, and the idea of how we create a world that is not only fundamentally restructured, but actively places well-being as a succinct and distinct value over profit and power, and is placed very much as on the same pedestal as people and humanity, and is recognized as perhaps not a physical currency, but has the same significance and has the same kind of weight placed around that. And we've kind of organized around that using very much the same kind of community organizing tactics that have fueled every single social justice movement. We very much steered clear of NGO corporate-style tactics that we felt too often are used to constrain and to continue the kind of oppressive capitalist systems that brought the climate crisis into into kind of what we're seeing right now, and created the kind of, I mean, you're all here, so you all know what the climate crisis is, but created the kind of post-apocalyptic world that we're seeing, particularly across the global south, and the kind of suffering of the most vulnerable, the most marginalized people. And a movement that's built around that really must have those most marginalized at its center. And that doesn't mean using vague words to keep the focus on the most vulnerable, but rather it's an active thing. And it means recognizing the intersections of climate justice with migrant justice and with racial justice. And the way we've built on that interconnectivity has been through connecting those movements, through connecting those different organizations, through saying this is not just a social justice issue that is reliant on just one country's actions, but rather this demands global connectivity. This demands the use of the expansive kind of communication that we are seeing today, the use of social media, the use of uplifting smaller platforms, smaller organizations, smaller groups that have been fighting for so long and yet continue to go unheard. It's been creating those connections, creating those networks through literally WhatsApp chats, through Twitter feeds, and through group chats from young people who say, this is what matters to us. This is the only relevant thing that matters to us, and it is relevant because it is everything. Because everything that we care about, from knife crime to homelessness to climate change, is part of the same issue. And so resolving that issue, ending that system, and creating a better, more equitable, securer future, one that is not reliant on endless extraction, but rather allows for a circular economic model, is built through emulating that within our groups, within our communities, is built through taking energy into local ownership. It is built into our own lives, into the way in which we actively decolonize the world around us, in the way in which we actively take a stand against, from local authorities to international governments, the way in which we continue to invade and occupy the most high up of places where power is utterly centralized, and we say we will deconstruct this. And once those values and those principles are centered within an organization, within a group of people, the fluidity and the ability of that organization becomes a movement. I think we see it now with individuals across the world. So often people call Bernie Sanders, for example, who has championed the Green New Deal, as the leader of a movement. But rather, we would argue that a real movement, a movement that is designed for success, and a movement that is designed for fluid and fair change, has no real leaders, but is rather a collective form of community organizing on a scale that, as of yet, hasn't been seen. It is reliant on the principles of socio-political organizing and of theory that dates back for centuries and that has been successful for centuries in social justice movements. And through this process, what we see is we do see, these climate strikes, and we see the success of climate movements around the world, but we also see the failures. We see, the Canadian government clearing out Indigenous people, attempting to block a pipeline. We see governments like ours actively, effectively wreck chances of successful negotiations through continually attempting to push forward fossil fuel companies and the interests of big oil and the kind of capitalist ideas that once again brought this all through. And so if we want to build a successful movement, firstly we go back to the theory. We say, how do we win? We organize. And then we say, how do we organize and who do we center in our organizing? Who is most vulnerable, who is suffering, who has been suffering, who is ignored, who is pushed out of the conversation, who do we not think about every day? And then we say, how do we make everyone who is purposefully subduing attempts to create a movement so uncomfortable that it is no longer worth it to wreck and destruct the fabric upon which we live, right? We say, how do we make the current system so ungovernable that those in power have nothing to do, that they physically cannot continue extracting, they cannot continue neocolonizing the world around us, and they cannot continue centralizing their power and refusing to allow the democratic process of organizing to succeed. And I think, I'm no theorist and I'm no thinker, and I say this quite a lot, but in order to build a movement, you don't need theorists, because the theory is there, the thought is there, the examples, the history is there. You just have to look at how others have done it, and they've done it through organizing, and they've done it through saying, I'm angry, you're angry, let's do something together. Let's connect, let's build networks, let's take collective action, let's take direct action that harms fossil fuel infrastructure. Let's both show our commitment to decentralizing power, to decolonizing the world around us, and let's tell that through stories, through getting out there, and through succeeding in our efforts to build an organization that is not just representative of what we see in this room, but is representative of the struggles that so many people have faced in trying to build a movement that can overcome the climate crisis.
Thank you. Fantastic, thanks Noga. And talking about community organising and ownership, should we go to you next, Kareem?
Cool, yeah, thanks for having me. So I was just going to quickly talk about what I do, and then using the questions you sent. So, I'm a musician. I grew up in London. I guess my kind of method of getting involved in this started with trying to replicate something I'd experienced. So like you said, it's all been done in the past. So I was fortunate enough to grow up in a place called Walters Way in southeast London, where my mum and dad and a community of people were able to build their own house. It was a council-funded scheme. My parents were living in kind of overcrowded council estate in Deptford. This is 1985, and they had this innovative kind of architect and council team who got together and were basically using public land to allow people on the housing list to build their own house. The idea is that you can build it yourself as long as you can cut a straight line, drill a straight hole. They're really simple design. This is in 1985. I was born in 1987, so I luckily grew up in this kind of radical alternative environment, but I thought that was normal. And then eventually got to older age and realized that it's not normal growing up in London to have that kind of space to grow up in. So I got to the age where I had to move out, find somewhere to live, couldn't afford to live in London. About the same time, I helped my dad kind of rebuild the house practically to make it energy self-sufficient. So we installed a ground source heat pump, put photovoltaics, re-insulated the home, triple glazed, all of that stuff. So that kind of taught me this idea that a building or a home can generate renewable energy. So this kind of idea crystallized in my mind about combining the two of kind of building housing, but also housing which generates energy. And And so, yeah, I created RUSS. RUSS stands for Rural Urban Synthesis Society. It's a community land trust. The name comes from the idea that in 2008 was the first time we'd crossed the threshold where more people live in cities than they do rurally. And obviously people in cities consume more energy and have a bigger carbon footprint. So the idea was about creating a community of Londoners who want to do something about that to improve, well, to live sustainably in the context of London. Cut a long story short, we found a site in 2012, a lot of campaigning, a lot of organising, a lot of meeting and negotiating. If anyone's interested, just go look up National Community Land Trust Network. There's community land trusts across the country. I think it started in America. There's thousands there. The idea is that you manage the land on a non-profit basis, which is an asset for the community to manage together. So we have got nearly 1,000 members now. Same structure as a cooperative, 1 member, 1 vote. Every shareholder is a member. We've got, nearly 1,000 members. We've got a site which we've been working on for a while. We've got planning permission. We've got the loan lined up. We should be starting the site, but I have to say we have hit some pretty big hiccups of late, so I can't give a really positive update today, but the idea they should be built by 2022 is 33 homes, 4-storey, high energy performance. It's a mix of shared ownership, social rents, affordable rents. I won't go into too much detail about that stuff. I'll move on to the other stuff. But I started off as a musician, so we set up a record label. We fundraised to create the Community Land Trust through our gigs and record sales. It's from up with my brothers and my friends. Set up a label called 12 Tone. We had a band called United Vibrations. That's how this whole thing started. I'm going to go on to the next question. What do you think are the most powerful levers of action? I'm going to be annoying and say there aren't any levers. It'd be great if there was. There's only people. And I think that's important because it's a chaotic system. So you can predict what pulling a lever will do, but what actually happens, you can never predict that because it's not that simple. But anyway, so useful things. I mean, you've already touched on community organising. The first thing I wrote about people in answering this question was this idea of having a common ground, a collective vision, a positive vision. I know someone here this morning was talking about circular economy and cradle to cradle. If you haven't read that book, I strongly recommend it. They talk about the need for this environmental movement to paint a really inspiring and hopeful, positive vision of the future. Because without that, it's just not going to happen. And another book, Transition Hand Guide, talk about psychology of change. This idea that we tell everyone that we're going to crash and burn. It doesn't. The way the human psyche, it doesn't help change. We need a positive vision which we can all get on board with. So that's what we did with RUSS from the beginning. So talking to local people, like who doesn't want sustainable, affordable housing? Everybody wants it. How can we get involved? What can we do to help? So that was our starting position. And it allowed us to grow quite quickly, having that positive vision. And I think the dominant narrative, although it's beginning to change, but the dominant narrative has been of late the kind of, Smith in the Matrix, humans are the virus with the shoes, and if we die, the best thing to do is if we just die and compost ourselves. I don't think that's really a good starting point for getting people to be part of a movement. This sounds obvious, and obviously with people, I think, our ability to cooperate in huge numbers is what makes us different. So in terms of the animal kingdom and the planet, our ability to cooperate in such huge numbers, that is our unique kind of special gift. And that comes through storytelling, through the fictions we tell ourselves. So I've kind of done that bit. So community organising is another tool for change. We've kind of touched on it a little bit. I would say one of the questions you missed off your list was, what does winning look like? Mm-hmm. What is winning? Understanding power. And I think often we move without understanding power. And actually, if you don't understand power, then I think we're in a much weaker starting position. So power, organised people, organised money. I think you have to add organised data to that. So that's a new one. I think we're having to still figure out what that means. And with the money thing, I feel like the kind of social justice activist kind of thing, I think culturally, inherently, there's a serious lack of understanding of money. I think we'd be much better off if we understand how capital works. I mean, I'm 33. I've only just realised myself, how this functions. Why the rich get richer, why the poor get poorer. And I think rich people, they learn how to invest. We learn how to consume and how to buy. But what are we investing our money in? And I think we need to start thinking as investors and understanding capital. I know it sounds a bit iffy, power and money, but I think if you look at the social investment sector, it's growing immensely. I think there was an article recently, it's like 502 billion or trillion or something. Like, it's a huge sector. We're getting a loan from Triodos Bank, an ethical bank, to finance what we're trying to do. I think inevitably when it comes down to changing the world in a concrete way, you're going to have to understand money. There's no way around it. And just saying money is evil and we're not going to deal with it, my opinion is that's not really going to help move things forward, but we can have that conversation. Yeah, and then I guess, the question was what levers for change? I put two which I don't really know much about, but I think the problem is the world is changing, but it's not changing fast enough to meet the challenges that we're facing. But one of the things which undoubtedly has the potential to save a lot of lives, which ultimately is going to come down to, is migration. And I think I'm not an expert on migration. My partner is, both her parents are refugees. She can tell you all about it, but it's, in terms of the economics of it, just the reality of it, unless people are allowed to move around the planet freely, a lot of people are going to be facing very difficult situations. When we see it with the Mediterranean, the whole trying to get across the Mediterranean to Europe, and all the trajectories are it's going to get worse. And I feel like if we're all just stuck, hit on this side of that and just watching up against the glass, like what can we do? And I feel like, when I say migration, I mean like movement of people, movement of capital, social capital. So when I say capital, it's not just money, social capital, knowledge capital, money itself. And the other lever, last thing, if you wanted to change the world radically for a very small cost, is we should all start using compost toilets. Doesn't cost anything.
We'll feed that back to the Royal Geographical Society. Thank you, Kareem. So now we'll go to Sholeh, who is the producer of Season for Change, which is a big program which is leading up to COP26. So I'll let Sholeh talk about that.
Great, thank you, Farah. Is this working? Yeah, there we go. I feel like there's already been such a rich opening of the discussion on movement building, and I have to say I don't really feel like an expert on community organising or movement building, but I can give you a perspective perhaps from the cultural sector, and I'll start by telling you about Season for Change, which is a programme that Julie's Bicycle and Arts Admin are leading on behalf of a whole series of organisations across the arts and culture, with an aim to engage at least 250 cultural organisations and artists in the lead up to COP26, which of course the UK is hosting in Glasgow this November, with a goal to reach 10 million people to celebrate the environment and to inspire urgent action through the arts and culture. And I'll tell you a bit about our approach to this in terms of movement building, but I think one of the provocations that I'll offer in terms of levers for change, perhaps to kind of build on the brilliant points made already, is that movements very rarely seem to emerge very quickly, seemingly out of nowhere, but actually they often build on years, if not decades, of really dedicated work and effort and connecting and community building of different kinds, whether that's community organising at the grassroots level or community building amongst particular communities, in this case, the cultural sector. And so I think it's important to recognise that Season really is building on over a decade's worth of research and insight, tools, empowering people really with the right information and making it as easy as possible for organisations and individuals to kind of transform their organisations, transform themselves, and take climate action in the most relevant ways for the cultural sector. And much of that's been led by Julie's Bicycle and many of the other organisations in this room. Of course, individual cultural organisations. So I think it's just, I say that because I think it's really worth us kind of bearing in mind the long tail that it takes to arrive at kind of a peak movement building moment of achieving kind of critical mass, which is what we're aiming for this year. So our kind of approach really for Season for Change in terms of thinking about how we reach all of these organizations and really kind of build a critical mass of participation is also about looking at the landscape that we're in, because of course there are already a lot of cultural movements out there, some of which have been kind of coalescing through various programs, like Julie's Bicycle's partnership with Arts Council England, which has mobilized and empowered over 800 organizations over the last 6 years. The Declare movements that have obviously kind of popped up over the last 18 months or so, Music Declares, Culture Declares, Architects Declare. And then there's all of the cultural associations and organizations out there that have been representing the sector and different interests within it for many years. So we're also in this age of movements, and I think we're also seeing that at a much wider scale with the climate strikes, with Extinction Rebellion. So also I think one of the levers of change really at this macro scale is thinking about, wow, okay, how do we coordinate across these different movements so that we're also making sure we're mutually uplifting each other towards really the kind of common goal that we're all working towards. Of course, that can be seen across many scales, but for us thinking about Season for Change, that is really how do we mobilize effectively around this moment in November and in the lead up to it, where the UK will be hosting possibly the most important climate talks to date in a very interesting political climate, given Brexit, given all of the different political challenges that we're kind of seeing across the globe. And so our approach really has been to think about how we can actually build partnerships with many of the movements that are already kind of there. And this is me sharing the approach, but also kind of opening an invitation to anybody in the room who we haven't yet spoken to please connect with us and to come on the journey with us. So really kind of looking at how we can work through networks in partnership to mobilize our communications getting out there and to make sure that as many people and organizations across the country are participating. And perhaps in relation to that, why is that important? It's important for us in the lead up to COP that we're not just kind of creating a spotlight on Glasgow and on this political moment. It's also about thinking about how we can use these kind of political moments to make the climate crisis as relevant and as meaningful as possible to people at a kind of micro-local level. So part of the way that we're kind of framing this and supporting organizations to get involved with a campaign toolkit, with our communications partnerships and with a series of commissions is to really say, who are you as an organization? What are the issues that you care about? Who are the people that you represent in your community? Who are you representative of? What issues are you already kind of really engaged with? And where does the climate crisis intersect with that? So if you're in a region that's been hit by floods, how can you be kind of directly engaging with those local climate issues through your program, through your work, through the actions that you're taking as an organization, so that in the lead up to COP, we're not saying, look, there's something happening in Scotland, there's a Paris Agreement being discussed, and most people kind of feeling like, well, what real bearing does that have on my life? It's really about saying, what's happening for you locally to connect there emotionally, practically, tangibly, creatively, to feel a sense of empowerment, and then to make the connection that there is also this kind of global moment happening that you're part of, that you have agency within. So yeah, maybe I'll leave it there in terms of the provocation and levers for change. We're going to be doing a briefing later on the detail of how you can participate and get involved in Season, but briefly to finish, we have a website, which is seasonforchange.org.uk. Come and sign up and be part of the journey. But yeah, maybe let's open out to a discussion and we can evolve from there.
Great, thank you, Sholeh. I've just got one question and then we can open it out to the floor. And that's really sort of, I want to dig a little bit deeper into the role of the arts. One of the things that we do at Julie's Bicycle is we have produced a podcast last year called The Colour Green, which is all about how racial and social and climate justice connect. And Kareem was one of our lovely guests. And one of the things that you talked about was the unwillingness sometimes of people to respond to artists and as political commentators or social commentators. So, you know, when we're talking about climate change, what is the way, or what are the other ways that the creative community can engage with all of those issues, and how do we connect to people and to communities? You don't have to go first.
Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that really stood out for me last year was the week before kind of the massive climate strike in September. One of the kids from a theatre group that I've been running for the last 3 or 4 years said, I know you're organising this climate strike next week. Please, can we take a break from play rehearsals and do something about that? And I was like, okay, but I don't know any plays or any projects about the climate crisis, so I have nothing we can direct. And they went, that's fine. We'll think of something else. And we ended up kind of doing flash mobs all around London that were based around the idea of like burn the disco, not the planet. And you see a group of like little kids doing that, randomly dancing in Hammersmith Square. It hits people sometimes, and I think I kind of always come back to this idea that within the arts there's 2 branches. There's like the primary school idea of show and tell. So it's like you show it. If you're an organisation, you divest, you give your employees paid leave so they can come join the climate strike, you put everything about the climate crisis that you know all over your social media, all over your newsletters, you actively kind of educate your employees or your employers, and you really push that forward and then rebrand the company effectively, and you ensure the organisation is a model for what we can become, and you keep pushing, and then you have the tell part, which is you tell these stories. If you're a creative organisation, if you're working in the arts sector, then think creatively. Reinvent the way in which we communicate. Reinvent the way in which you hit people. Make it emotional, but yes, make it positive. Something that was really magical for me last year and kind of really hit me was this wonderful animated video that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez designed, which is about, it's on YouTube, and it's about kind of looking back from 2038, I think, of like how we get to a better future. Like, what does a global Green New Deal look like? What is that future actually? And I remember, I'd been organising around the Green New Deal for a good 3 months then. Like, I'd sat in the back of McDonald's and written up the principles, but this was the first time that I could envision what that could look like. And I remember literally crying because it was so emotional. I remember showing my family and being like, this is what we're fighting for, this is what we're striking for. And being able to create that sense of like emotional significance of what is a better world? What are we actually looking for? What is this idyllic utopia that we have to achieve within the next 10 years? When we talk about like dismantling 500 years of kind of the colonial violence that has led to the climate crisis, and we reach this paradise, what does that look like? We've never known a world like that, and yet we have to get to it. And so actually just creating that vision of that paradise, that kind of Elysian paradise that is ours to rally for, is ours to fight for, is ours to strike for, rather than an individual's role to decipher, but just to say, what if it looked like this? What if this is what drives you forward? Because ultimately, when we talk about organising, when we talk about movement building, there is an end goal. There has to be one. Otherwise, there is no motivation, there is no drive. You can't build a movement just out of fear alone, but out of a desire for success, a desire for a better, more equitable world. And we are so fortunate to have such kind of a blooming arts industry in this country in particular, to say, we can create and we can innovate and we can use kind of the exciting talent and ideas and things that we have to say, well, I'm gonna put this vision on a stage, and people will come and they'll say, I want that. I'm gonna fight for it. I'm gonna, take unknown community organisers and I'm going to tell their story, and I'm going to tell the story of what they want, even if we haven't achieved it yet, even if it isn't yet realised or recognised. I'm going to put it out there because that's the platform we have, that's how we use it, that's how we get there. That's collaboration across movements, it's collaboration across organisations. That's how we build this vision for success, and then we fight for it until we get there.
Do either of you have anything quickly to add to that?
If I may.
Yeah.
I think it's a really well-made point, and I'd say that there's many different ways in which we can kind of demonstrate and prototype the future, and one is what's happening on our stages, and absolutely right. I think it's also thinking about how we present and then also connect around that. So yes, how can we kind of present stories and then help create pathways for audiences, for people, for communities to say, yeah, I feel the fire, I want to fight for that, and actually here's a really tangible way. Here's someone I'm literally connected to. Here's a movement that's being signposted for me. Here's a strike happening next week that I can go and be part of. So how are we also helping that movement literally of people through the cultural experience to other ways that they can take action? And the other is how we can kind of tell the stories of what we are becoming as we're in transition. You know, so many organizations that I know kind of sat here today are doing absolutely amazing things to transition, and it feels messy when we're in that kind of process of almost getting there with our waste management, or having a 5-year plan for our energy transition. And it's really important that we're not just telling the stories of what happens when we get to the end, but as Noga's saying, kind of like telling people, like inspiring people with the vision that we're creating for ourselves in transition, and kind of confronting the fear a bit of telling those stories preemptively, to kind of build a culture of telling the slightly messier stories of learning as we do it. And also kind of like challenging that culture of perfectionism, to have to be perfect before we tell the story. Like, we need to tell the story that this looks like many different things as it's happening. And we're excellent storytellers in that respect. If anyone's going to do it well, we can.
Do we have time for one question? Okay, so we've got time for one very quick question from the audience. I would like to... Does anyone have a question? Ooh, no questions. Okay, do you have... Oh, one right at the back.
Hiya, my name's Ella Wild. I'm from the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, and we're running the Manchester Science Festival this October with the theme of climate. I just thought it'd be interesting to ask, in terms of how you present the theme of climate, obviously it's such a massive issue and topic, what would you say are the key sub-themes that we could look at as part of the festival and for other cultural organisations and venues in the room?
So if we answer that really quickly.
I'll go after this too.
Top key topics.
I don't run a cultural organisation, so unfortunately I don't think I'm best placed to answer, but I think in explaining anything, any key topic, that it's the simplicity that's always key. It's breaking down and saying, not everyone's a scientist, not everyone's studied years of theory, not everyone understands exactly what we mean when we talk about like 450 ppm in the air. I don't understand what that means. Like, I know it's bad, but I don't get it. And I think it's actually just saying, it's like when you're a kid and you're drawing a mind map. It's joining the dots together and saying, this is exactly what it means, this is exactly how it affects you in your life, this is how your life could look like, this is what, if it gets better, this is what the world could look like if it gets worse. And kind of inviting those questions, those answers, and breaking down those key topics. And if the fact that you have kind of this array of scientists and experts and theorists at your disposal is, I think, a huge advantage in the ability to just use this opportunity to just teach and say, well, here is what it is. Let us learn from each other. Let us share that knowledge. Let us entrust each other with information that could change the world. And let's break that down so it's simple enough for anyone to understand it, for anyone to make change.
So I would say migration is definitely a subtopic, the migration crisis, and all the trajectories of where food production is going to collapse and where people are. For example, those islands where they've got like a national sovereign fund to relocate their whole country. That's the kind of scale people are kind of having. So I think definitely migration. And the thing about the arts and the storytelling, which kind of links to the question before, because there's a book called The Great Derangement by Ahmed. I mentioned this last time, and he kind of critiques how, like, in a literary world, like, that no one's really tackled climate change as a thing. And I think, yeah, if you can find stories which do kind of begin to unravel it a bit, that would be cool. I mean, I'm assuming you're going to be working with young people, so definitely a good way in. But yeah, migration.
So that's us for this panel. If you have any more questions, we will be collecting them on Slido, so you can follow the link and use the hashtag to get entry into that room. So thank you to Kareem, to Noga, and to Sholeh.
Just a quick reminder, we have reduced our changeover time now to 5 minutes, which is going to be like, so very fast. But just to tell you, first of all, thank you very much, Sholeh, Kareem, Noga, and Farah. And basically what we need to know is that at the Education Centre, we're going to have a panel on art, nature, and regeneration with the artists Jason De Taylor, Nabil Ahmed, Witter-Johnson, and Lola Young, and also Andrea Carter from D6. While in here, those who want to just stay, not stress over the changeover, we're going to have a panel on how to reach net zero, and we will be with the Tate Modern, Opera North, and Julie's Bicycle, and Repowering. So just those 5 minutes, and also, just to remember that Slido option to send your questions. Thank you, and see you in 5 minutes. to those who've been at the Education Centre. And yeah, we're just going to now introduce Ayanna. So it's basically Ayanna Witter-Johnson, I hope I said the whole name correctly, with us, who is an artist, a musician, and moves seamlessly between alternative R&B and the classical music world. So welcome, Ayanna.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share with you a song to celebrate the beloved Nightingale and to honour the amazing time that I have with Sam and all the team every year when we pilgrimage to the south of England and serenade the nightingales in real time. Yes.
you. Thank you so much, Ayanna. That was absolutely beautiful. Stunning performance. Thank you for being here today with us. So now we are going to welcome you into this road to net zero carbon. At Julie's Bicycle, actually, obviously, we've been discussing quite a lot, especially in the previous panel, about the role of creativity and the arts in tackling the climate challenge and using our voices as a means of communications and really engaging citizens. But obviously what we know as well, and I'm sure everyone in this room agrees to this, is that what we need to do is also to turn that response into actual reductions to our carbon emissions, to our emissions. So it is our role as well as communicating and engaging and empowering our societies to also embody that change and leading on demonstrating what transformation looks like. So I'm very happy to introduce you to Chaitanya Kumar, who is the head of climate and energy at the Green Alliance, and will be introducing our next panelists. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yes. Excellent. Thank you. The panel knows who they are. They're just making their way to the stage. Richard, you mind? Yeah. Have you made it? Everyone on stage? Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Chaitanya Kumar. I work as the head of climate and energy at a small charity and think tank called Green Alliance. We work on public policy issues, primarily to do with the natural environment. Climate and energy is very much a part of it. Colleagues of mine look at more niche issues like waste and resources and where does our stuff comes from? How does it get made, and how do we ensure there's sustainability within those processes? Just very quickly, I'm going to abuse my privilege as the chair. Just through a show of hands, can I ask how many of you have heard of the net zero idea? Fantastic. All right. I wasn't planning to explain that either, but just wanted to check. We've got in this country the legislation to achieve net zero by 2050. How many of you think that's bold enough? Raise your hands if you think that's bold. Oh, one. Excellent. Good. I'm sure others will want to talk to you after that. But that's just joking. But we're not going to get into the debate of net zero by 2050 or otherwise. What we know is we are going to hit at some point over the next 3 decades a net zero target in this country and hopefully around the world. And that's what science demands, and we need to sort of reach that goal. And achieving that is not just the responsibility of national government or local government or any one set of actors. Everyone across society has to be involved, obviously with a common but what is called differentiated responsibility. It is not reasonable for individuals to be expected to actually live a completely austere life by 2050 and then not consume anything. But institutions represented on this panel, governments, businesses, everyone has a role. I've got a couple of minutes to talk about what we do before I move on to the panel. So one of the things I've been asked is really to understand what does meaningful net zero commitment look like? What does it mean? Everyone's been talking about net zero. You've heard, I think, was it BP or Shell or a few of the these companies who let's be honest, haven't really painted themselves with glory over the last few decades, but nonetheless have come out and said, we will achieve net zero by so-and-so, right? So there is this push and rhetoric around everyone's up for achieving net zero, but what exactly does it mean? How do you really evaluate a net zero commitment? There are a couple of things that well, 5 things in fact, that I've identified here. One is, has it got a roadmap to getting there? In this country, we do not have a policy roadmap to get into net zero by 2050, and that's a major gap. We've made an announcement, we've legislated, but we do not have a policy pathway to getting there. The second is, has it got buy-in from the most senior levels of administration or power? From a government point of view, we're talking of number 10, Whitehall, everybody. Institutions point of view, heads of institutions, for instance, or heads of businesses. Does it have adequate finance behind it? What we've heard from a report early this year is only 1% of money or investment from the largest oil and gas companies is into sustainable energy or renewable energy, only 1%. But a lot of them have made big commitments around net zero, right? So you have to put money where your mouth is, and that is another strong test for net zero. Does it respond to people, the impacts on them, the costs and benefits of net zero? And is it beyond a techno-fix approach? I haven't mentioned this to the other panelists, but I'm going to judge your ideas on that basis as well. It is really putting people at the heart of the transition as well, and really understanding that all of us speak about co-benefits, that this transition is actually good for everybody, but we really have to communicate that. Otherwise, we'll keep getting pushback for any policy change that we would like to introduce in the context of net zero. So I will pause there, and I'll basically try and introduce the panel very quickly. I'm not going to go into details, but just quickly introduce them. Each panelist has got about 5 minutes to speak about how they're thinking about net zero in their respective institutions. We're going to have a discussion amongst us very briefly, and then I'll open it up to questions at the end. Is that all right? Cool. So first up, we've got Francis. If you don't mind, we can start with you. The director of Tate Modern. You've got 5 minutes.
Okay, clock's ticking. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm going to speak very informally and off the cuff, and I'll try and speak as fast as Kate Raworth. I think there's a problem with this afternoon. I don't think the road to net zero carbon is the target. I don't think it's possible. In July of last year, at the invitation of Culture Declares, at the invitation of Extinction Rebellion, and actually at the kind of instigation of many dozens of artists based in the UK and abroad, Tate took the decision to formally, publicly declare climate and ecological emergency. And we did that because we had already behind us a decade of quite secret, silent, but really serious history of trying to reduce our carbon footprint. But we realized that we were at a tipping point where we could no longer just attend to our own house, but there was a moment that we had to offer some companionship and some leadership and some understanding, and to create a context in which the visual arts sector, or a small part of it, could begin to move forward, at least to answer the questions that we will need to answer in the coming years. And I think all 4 directors of Tate Galleries and the director of Tate are aligned on stating that climate and ecological emergency is the biggest single issue of our time. So we've undertaken a huge amount of activity, adjustments to our buildings, our systems, to reduce our carbon footprint. And we are aiming, as physical entities, to hit net zero in 2030. But of course, having done that and taking that decision to move in that direction, the next question is it enough? And of course, it isn't enough. And now is the time. We know the world we will not limit, we will not get to 1.5, 2%, we know that we are facing very, very profound planetary change that will impact here in London, sure, but it will impact massively in the very parts of the world that international organizations like Tate network with, that we value, that give us our raison d'etre. We think of Tate Modern as truly international, as transnational, as a network of artists and organizations. We just happen to be in London, and we address a London audience. But our audience is also in Dhaka, it's in Mexico City, it's in the Atacama Desert. And in order to think about our purpose in the world, we have to think of our purpose in a part of that complex ecology of artists, arts organization, and networks that is truly global. So we are implicated massively in this. So I'm trying at the moment, I'm not speaking really official Tate stuff. I'm talking now just very briefly, 3 more minutes probably, the questions that are in my mind, 2 minutes, that keep me awake at night. I'll just shoot them out at you. And if anybody wants to talk about them later, over the coming months, I'm very happy. So now is the time to ask, what are the longer term adjustments that we will need to make as an institution, as a culture, to survive and actually to have meaning as the world profoundly alters? What kind of leadership does our sector require? And I mean the sector in the broadest and most complex way. How might climate and ecological emergency in turn reshape the narratives of both history and lived experience of artists and audiences? Our content will change. We will think about the now and the past in a different way in light of what we're going through. So what is to be done? Business as usual is not possible. The growth model is deeply damaged. My whole career has been spent pushing at that growth model, celebrating increasing activity, increasing numbers, unstoppable acquisitions, the accumulation of tangible heritage. All that is up for grabs. So the big questions are, can we retain our values, boldness, kindness, rigor, while also placing the environment and social responsibility at the heart of what we do? So some of the very specific questions for me at Tate are, what do we generate? Where are our surpluses? Do we make too many exhibitions? Do we make too many acquisitions? Do we lend too many things? Do we have too many spaces that are underused when they're like after hours? Too many creative individuals, weirdly, servicing 70% of our audience that is already privileged economically and educationally. So how might we address the notion of degrowth or shifting that growth in relation to public purpose and also serving the emergency? What do we want to achieve? Where do we underachieve? Too little outreach and social practice, too little sector leadership, too little participation, too little co-production, too little families, too little creative learning, too little making activities. So all these things are indicative. They're just questions in my head about the moment, about how do we rebalance our organizations? How do we rebalance our structures, our networks? How do we recalibrate in order to kind of future-proof us for the difficult times ahead? And I think there is a value divide in many of our organizations between the activities that we present for the already privileged and those that we present for the underprivileged. And as we begin that process of reusing and recycling and repair of that circular economy that we've been talking about a bit today, how do we together, and we are culture in this room, how do we learn from each other and not duplicate, but reuse and recycle the best practice in this room? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Francis. I'm going to quiz you at the end, but I'm going to move on to the other panelists. I must say this clock here is very intimidating. So try and ignore it, but at the same time, I will try and wave at you after 5 minutes, okay? I'm going to move on to Afsheen, Kabir, Rashid, from Repowering London, co-founder, co-CEO, and also the chair of Community Energy England. So anything to do with community energy, local energy, Afsheen's your person. All right. Yes.
Thank you, thanks for that. So yeah, as Chaitanya's introduced, I'm from community energy. So for me, I have a day job which is running a small organization delivering community energy schemes. And while I welcome the declarations that are being made on climate emergency, I want to see action. I want to see practical action now, and I want to see it scaled and faster. And I think we aren't really seeing the emergencies translating into that rapid, scalable action. And from my perspective, I want to see more of community energy. And the reason why is because community energy is a key solution to achieving that net zero. But it's also about a vision that is decarbonized, decentralized, and democratized, which puts people at the heart of the energy system. It essentially, addresses some of the market challenges that we have and the way our current nationalized energy system works, in that people are disengaged and disempowered and lack the suppliers and the energy institutions and systems that is meant to serve them. But actually the way the models work and the business models are designed and regulations is designed is to serve exactly the business models of those retailers and suppliers, not the consumers it's meant to serve. And that is the problem. And that's what community energy also takes to tackle. What's the beauty about community energy is that it empowers individuals. It links individual action to collective action. And I know there's a lot of anxiety around climate action and the climate emergencies that are being declared, and for people not knowing what to do. And this is a great way to come together in your community with other individuals to provide those local solutions. Community energy links the local problems, local to global. So it's really about people creating local solutions in their own village and town, installing solar panels, and it's kind of linking them to global issues like climate change, which, as an individual, you feel disempowered to deal with that. And for me, as an organization, what we do, and what do our projects look like? What does community energy look like? It's about group of people coming together, installing solar panels on their community building, on their social housing estate, or their churches and village town halls. We raise finances through community shares, and our model is around a cooperative structure. As was discussed earlier, it's one member, one vote. It's a democratized system, and it empowers people to take control and ownership. But it's not all about putting solar panels on and generating renewable electricity. It's also about tackling fuel poverty, advising local and vulnerable residents on how they can live in warm, affordable, comfortable homes. It's also about innovation, and there's a huge energy transition taking place right now. And we're looking at new technologies. We're looking at how can we supply that locally owned, locally generated renewable energy to individuals living in that block as well. It's about a just transition. A lot of what Repowering does, we work in a lot of communities in London, of areas of high deprivation. And it's about ensuring that those people who cannot afford their homes and who cannot afford to invest in renewables can access and can participate and benefit from the renewable energy and the clean, green revolution that we see today. We go one step further as well, and it's not just about empowering local citizens and individuals, it's also about educating and training and upskilling local communities and local young people to to have jobs, to have work experience, and to be the force that's going to enter the economy in the future. So I think community energy can do a lot, and what I want to see is more collaboration, more partnerships, not just with the communities, but with local authorities, with private sectors. And of course, there's a huge opportunity for the creative industry to collaborate in this space so that we can reach more communities, reach diverse communities, and ensure that we can achieve this net carbon transition. Thank you.
Can we move on to, can I ask Chiara to speak, or should we have, Richard's got a presentation. All right, cool. Richard, put you on the spot. Thank you. As it says here, Richard Ashton, General Manager, Opera North, You've got 5 minutes, Richard.
Thank you, everybody. From Opera North, based in Leeds, we're a touring company. We have our own specific challenges, and I just wanted to take you through some of our challenges and hopefully some of the solutions that we think we are working through. At the moment, we are provoking our own board, and I think you probably are also doing this to your own trustees. A company that is not environmentally sustainable has no future, and we spent half a day with our board of trustees talking about this. We even gave them 3 hours of carbon literacy training as well, which is very helpful. Our company is going through 100% of carbon literacy training, which again is part of our strategy towards net zero. In 2018-19, Opera North created 350 tons of carbon and through all of these areas, but at the moment that doesn't include our audience travel. And we're looking at acting on our buildings, with our people, our productions, how we communicate and engage, and how we operate and travel. And then eventually, how our audiences come to us. So I want to give you an idea about the scale that we, as a touring company, have. This is Wagner's Ring Cycle. It traveled to 5 concert halls. 40,000 people came to it. And you can see the number of creative practitioners on the stage there and behind the stage, 198. And here is Verdi's Aida, again in the concert halls of the North, travelling from the Sage Gateshead all the way down to Nottingham. Again, 154 creatives. And here is one of our touring productions that's currently on at the moment. Hopefully you'll see the scale of one production, and we tour 3 of them in one go. This is just a little excerpt, so you can see the scale of the scenery and the people that are on stage and in the pit that we have to travel with. So one tour, 3 operas, 4 theatres, and 11 of these horrific wagons. So we're in the process of reducing and recycling, and we began our journey in 2018. In 21, we're showcasing our first recycled performance, working towards autumn 21, where everything in our company will have an aspect of environmental sustainability, and that includes everything that I do as an administrator and everybody who is on the stage as well. This is the Alcina. This is the brief that we've given to our creatives. In terms of no new set, props and costumes procured. We have a scenic store that currently stores around 40 productions. It's currently got sandbags around it actually at the moment because the river air is overflowing and we're just about containing the river at the moment. It will, if we don't have productions available there, we will source stuff from secondhand within the Yorkshire region. And it's important to have a themed work as well. We're working towards 2020 with our first small-scale environmental themed commission called Water's Diviner's Tale. And then in 2022, we'll be researching and developing a new commission for the main stage. We're also in the middle of a building project at the moment, of which I'm leading on, and we gave our mechanical engineering designers a full environmental brief. Here it is, ensuring direct energy supply so that we are masters of our own destiny, to check our building thermal envelope, of course to pop on photovoltaic panels on our roof, to improve our energy recovery and heat ventilation, and improving our lighting through LED systems and PIRs. So we're on a journey. We only started 2 years ago, and considering the size of our organisation, I think we're doing okay, but we've got a lot to do, and that's why we're challenging our board and also our audience, I think, to come on this journey with us.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And it's always good to see very clear, practical steps being taken by institutions to cut their carbon footprint. So The final speaker, Chiara from Julie's Bicycle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And thanks for bearing with us for putting ourselves on a panel for once. I know that's a little bit cheeky. So, you know, this panel we thought of as just a focus point on this need to reduce emissions. This is not a choice between sort of focusing on big policy change or action, because we need both of them, because action changes us, so we're more likely to support policy changes. And the other thing that I think all the panelists have hit on so far is that in taking action, it also brings us up against the boundaries where we realize what isn't possible without those much broader policy changes. And measuring our environmental impact. So in the first panel today, someone asked a question about how we avoid sort of going down this funnel of data. And of course, data can't capture everything, but data does keep us accountable to emissions reductions and to our understanding of our environmental impact. So it has to go hand in hand with some of these broader things around community organizing, around supporting our communities, around climate justice, but it's still an important part of the story that we can't leave out as institutions. So what is Julie's Bicycle working, and how are we supporting this creative community around that? One big part is our work with Arts Council England. So since 2012, we've been the delivery partner for Arts Council England's environmental support programme. That means more than 800 organisations are asked to report on their environmental data through our creative green carbon calculator tools, which are free to use for anyone, by the way. And they have to put in place environmental action plans. So that means we can track change over time, and it means that businesses of all sizes consider their impacts and are sort of nudged to take action. So this is a highlight of some of the data reported for 2018-19. 4 in 5 organizations say that reporting helps them to better understand impacts. And also, action sort of radiates outwards. So half of organizations say they've developed new artistic opportunities off the back of environmental initiatives. 1 in 4 say they're working with their city decision makers on environmental issues and problems in their local areas. And then I also want to focus in on this energy use question. So energy across the 747 organizations that reported last year, the energy use is the same as that which is required to power 122,000 UK households, and it equates to an energy spend of between 26 and 27 million pounds every year. So that data is powerful, because the other thing that it's allowed us to do is see that a very small set of large organizations are responsible for more than half of the reported carbon footprint. So now we're working with 30 of those organizations, who between them make up a third of the reported energy use and associated emissions, as part of what we are calling the Spotlight Programme. So we're supporting organizations, including Opera North, and I think a few more of you in the room, on energy management and setting measurable energy and carbon reduction targets using the Science Based Targets Initiative framework. So it's really creating a roadmap for zero carbon cultural buildings in the UK, and that means reducing an actual percentage reduce in energy use year on year. It means electrifying our buildings so we can get off the gas grid. And it means also helping to contribute to the continued decarbonisation of the energy grid, particularly looking at how we procure energy and support new renewable energy generation. Alongside that, we work with a huge range of arts and creative industries companies, including in the music industry, other performing arts, through our Creative Green Consultancy Programme. And that's really focusing on how we help guide individual businesses and organizations through this huge change that's required, and how we steer the knowledge that is needed. So we look at it through commitment. Again, is there someone, for example, in senior management who is looking after this? Are the financial resources there? How do we begin to unlock that? We look at it through understanding. So how is data being monitored? Keeping ourselves accountable to whether reductions are being achieved, and supporting organizations to put in place strategies. So again, there are areas that we understand really well, like energy use, and then there are other areas that I think the sector as a whole is only beginning to really, really focus on and dig down on. Different parts of the sector, you know, to different extents, things like business travel, things like touring, things like freighting, material use, and of course audience travel, again, which we know from past research does make up a good chunk of emissions in this sector. And when we're not doing that, we're supporting other sort of campaigns and projects in specific sectors, like powerful thinking in the festival sectors, which the Vision 2025 pledge includes reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, aiming to reduce annual diesel consumption by 50% by 2025 from a 2014 baseline, which is based on Julie's bicycle data benchmarks. Again, it's hugely ambitious, but actually with the research and examples that we have from the outdoor events sector, we know that it's possible. And then we take all of that experience on the ground and we try to scale it up, working with policymakers like the World Cities Culture Forum, so cultural departments in cities, with Manchester City Council, again, always looking at how can a creative sector support climate action within cities, which is so hugely important, especially now that so many local authorities are making their own commitments and plans and roadmaps. So where does that leave us? Again, I think picking up on some of the points that Chaitanya made right at the start, if you want to understand the ambition of the net zero commitment, you have to look beyond the target date and you have to look under the hood a little bit. As a sector, we have to reshape the sector's priorities so that a roadmap to net zero carbon emissions underpinned by a commitment to actual emissions reductions, not just offsets, becomes central to our creative mission and really translate all of that momentum into action. And we can choose to look at that as something quite daunting, or we can look at it as the most important creative challenge that we face. Thanks.
Thank you. Fantastic. I mean, I don't know how you guys managed it, but everyone was within time. Perhaps it was my very clear instructions at the beginning. So I've got about 7 minutes before I try and open it up to the audience. What I'm going to try and do is, I've tried to take down certain notes based on the remarks that the speakers have made, and I'm going to try and pick something from their remarks and ask the person next to them a question on the back of that. It'll be clear. It sounds confusing, but it'll be clear. So I suppose if you don't mind me kicking it off with you, Chiara, one of the things that Francis mentioned was business as usual simply cannot go on. I did notice one of the reports that said the show must go on, which is interesting. Francis sort of painted a picture, to me sounds radical. The terms like degrowth scare me a bit, but you are working with businesses with practical suggestions, things like moving on to heat pumps and renewable energy on site and fantastic solutions to cutting carbon emissions. But it still feels like the show must go on. It's just you're putting a green spin and cutting some carbon along the way. So how might you respond to Francis's provocation that the show must stop, I suppose?
I think this is the tension that everyone in this room is very much trying to navigate. We are part of a system at the moment and a business model, because ultimately the way that culture and a lot of the creative industry works right now is a business, and it has grown up in a time of abundance of energy, cheap energy through cheap fossil fuels and availability. So the tension I think that we're all facing is how quickly can we shift that when we know that we should have shifted it 10 years ago? And I think that's the provocation that we have to keep putting out there. And I think what we take heart in is sometimes even what we're saying seems to be changing quicker now than we ever thought possible. So I sometimes now walk into meetings expecting, people to go, really, you want us to actually reduce the emissions from our travel? That's not going to be, can we not spin it, as a relative based on the number of tours that we do? And actually people are starting to sit back and say, okay, what does that look like? How many flights do we have to cut across our business? And that is amazing to me. I think on the other side, there are these moments of disconnect where we know just how huge the transition and the task is ahead of us. And people want to take action tomorrow, and you say, okay, well, that is going to mean that you can't send that lorry out on the road. And it's sort of because we are not going to have non-fossil fueled powered heavy goods vehicles for another few decades that are going to be within reach for the arts. And then it snaps back, because I think then is the question of, okay, how willing and able are we really to make some of those leaps, and how quickly?
Thank you. That's the right answer. There's no right or wrong, of course. It's a complex question, as the creative industry. Anyways, where am I going with this? Francis, a request to respond to that, perhaps. Has it satisfied your provocation? And B, Afsheen's pointed on community energy. If Tate, given its institutional weight, can support community energy, for instance. Perhaps you already are, but if you can speak to how you might be able to do that.
Well, you asked me two questions.
I did, yes.
Okay, so I've got to answer two questions. Firstly, I like your response very much, but I think there's even more to that. I think, you know, in shrinking, at times of shrinking economies, what we tend to do with all our programs is we kind of like, we salami slice, you know, halve the number of flights, take 20% off the number of works in an exhibition, forget the champagne at the opening, and so but the offer is basically the same. It's just a sort of cheaper and shabbier one, or you dress it up with whatever. And I think the really interesting dynamic here for all of us who are in the creative industries is actually how do we deal with that? How do we respond to that in a really creative way? Because there is a golden opportunity to reinvent ourselves. And I'm very conscious that over my 20 years, the last 20 years at Tate, we've done quite a methodical, slightly behind the radar, but a really major shift in the way the stories we tell around art. We've decolonized the collection, we've opened it up, and we've done all that with actually not a huge resource base. And so we've profoundly changed something about the organization. And I'm quite excited about profoundly changing something else about the organization. Kate Raworth earlier talked about, you know, we were the first nation to industrialize, and wouldn't it be great if we were the first nation to deindustrialize in light of this emergency? You have to remember, all our cultural organizations came from that same moment, 18th, 19th century, and we live with that legacy, not just in our power plants, but in our institutions in the House of Lords, the Houses of Parliament, our museums, our schools, our hospitals. How many of them are fit for purpose? You know, 21st century creativity in 18th century buildings and 18th century structures. It's all up for grabs. It could be really exciting. Community energy. I mean, of course, we must have community energy. All of our big organizations, I so profoundly disagree with the idea that we can be masters of our destiny. It's community energy that will drive us, whether it's the real energy owned by the community, or just the energy of the people that we serve. I really mean that. So we're totally aligned.
Yeah. Thank you. Another correct answer. Richard, very quickly. Again, like I said earlier, it's great to see practical steps that you're taking to cutting your carbon footprint. Every time I try and get on the media talking about climate change, the question one gets asked, or I get asked, is cost. How much will it cost? And have you factored in how much it costs? And are you saying, even if it costs above and beyond what we may have budgeted for, we're still going to do it because that's the right thing? Is money an issue?
I think we are challenging our creatives to help us with this, and you give them the opportunity, and they suddenly come up with some amazing results. So giving them not necessarily a theme of environment, but to tell the story with an environmental theme has become exciting for us in our research and development, and to engage our staff has been very exciting. It's been a culture change in itself, actually. Small elements bring some great savings as well. We've managed to now procure 100% renewable energy ourselves throughout all our buildings. Yes, it costs a little bit more, but because of the savings we've been able to make ourselves, I'm able to justify that change to our finance director. So there are small changes. I appreciate what you say about masters of our own destiny, but we are we have to take the grip ourselves, or else someone else is going to take the grip from us. And I think that if we don't lead and help our creatives lead as well, then our art form for sure will be a dying one.
Silence. Afsheen, final question before I move to the audience is again, if in some sense you're sort of, the audience is here representing several institutions, cultural, creative institutions. If you had a very direct message to them, community energy doesn't necessarily feature, as far as I understand, in that space. But yeah, if you want to speak to them directly, which you are, what would you say?
That's the right question. I was kind of getting a bit nervous there, thinking what you would ask me. That's a good opportunity, really, for me. I just wanted to also highlight what are we doing currently using art in community energy. And one of the schools we're working in a primary school, wanted to have a project, on site, but they also wanted to engage their young children in the project, or to raise awareness around climate change and climate awareness. And we actually currently working with the teacher and a drama actor to kind of come together and design a play that takes the students from thinking about, oh my God, this is a really huge problem that we have here, and this is the impact it's going to have on our lives, to actually designing solutions, and they would then, the same class would then present a session to their assembly and to the rest of the school in terms of the solutions that they're coming up with. And I thought that was a great way of involving the creative industry and using performance and art and drama to engage with young people. But that's just one aspect, and there could be, I'm sure there's many other areas in which there is an interlink between art and performance with engaging communities, and that's just one. And we had to figure this out from scratch, and I think it's about how can we collaborate and how can we find toolkits or packages that of activities that we can then not only just engage with young people, but also bring people who aren't thinking about climate change, who aren't engaged in this room here, the voices that aren't here today. We take it a lot for granted that everyone's on this net zero transition along with us. There are many people who aren't, not because by choice, but they aren't because of life priorities are different. How do we use art to engage with wider communities? And I really feel that that's my call to you is if you don't have a community energy group in your local area, establish one. If you own a building or have access to a site, explore installing solar panels and generating renewable energy. If you work in a community and you want to raise awareness, join people in your local area to create a community energy group and engage with people beyond our bubble, beyond the people that we're already talking to in different ways. And I think that's quite a USP for the creative industries, is really to go beyond the people in this room and the people that are within our circles, because that's when we're going to see the change that we need. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. The message, yes, engage outside your bubble. I suppose it applies to most things in life these days. Engage outside your bubble. Can I take questions in sets of 3? If you have an urge to make a long comment, please don't. But 3 quick questions. 1, 2, yeah, please, if right here in the 3rd row. Yes.
Thank you. Mandy English, student at the University of Hertfordshire. Question to Richard, please. Do you carbon offset?
Not presently. There is a plan for it, potentially, but not at the moment, no. We're not quite on that journey.
Okay, because you can get to 0 without it?
No, not at all. Not
Okay.
at all. We haven't built that into our plan just yet.
But you will do.
Oh, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Absolutely. We're going to have to.
Yeah. And second question, do you see, in terms of audience travel, your works being delivered through cinemas so that people don't have to travel?
No, not currently. That's not part of our USP. That's for our sisters and brothers at Royal Opera House and the Metropolitan Opera in New York and Glyndebourne. But we trialled our first screening through streaming on Friday, actually. So we're trialling a little bit, but not on the scale of the Opera House or Met.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for all your comments. I'm Nina. I'm a student at Cambridge and a singer. I was wondering what you think about the way we put value or the way we judge the success of an opera company or of a choir, and whether we need to somehow ditch these weird vestiges of prestige and say that that's flying super far, or for a visitor going to the opera rather than watching it is the glamorous thing to do, and how we switch that narrative for it still to be glamorous to be trying to do an opera out of rubbish or something, when the whole tradition is beauty within the institution.
I think for us, in the same way that diversity is top of the list for us alongside environmental sustainability, if we are not sustainable in both of those aspects, then we are not excellent. So I think that's the view that we're taking, and that's why we're building it into our business plan for the future.
All right. Anyone else wants to take on that question? On the panel? No? All right. One, yes, right here and then there. First here, please.
Question for Richard and Francis, please. How are you communicating to your audience what you're doing in terms of becoming net zero or being sustainable, or your whole journey?
Well, okay, so let me answer in three ways. One is we are currently producing a very straightforward guide to climate emergency at Tate, which includes a statement around our vision, but then a lot of information about the very practical steps that we've taken. It's absolutely transparent and offers a lot of information and some background reading, because lots of people are coming to us and say, where's the toolkit? So there will be a very practical toolkit. We're also, over the course of the next few months, undertaking a really amazing program across Tate, hosted by Tate Modern and delivered by Tate Exchange, called Power to Change, which will begin with 3 closed invited sessions where we talk with ourselves, then with artists, then with sector colleagues, asking those really difficult questions in a very kind of open and frank and, in a context of trust, where we can be really, nothing will be on record, no social media, whatever, because so we can push at the edge of things. And that will lead to a really big, high-profile event in our Turbine Hall in June, a long table for 400 sector experts, so beekeepers and scientists, opera singers, and our street cleaners, as it were. And that will be, we hope there'll be a lot of information around that. So there are 2 actions that we are sharing publicly. And I think then the other thing we're trying to do is just make what we do very visible in our buildings. So we are adding some very simple messages to our walls and our windows that will, in a simple way, point out to people that the toilet they're using is being flushed with rainwater, and that when they put something in the bin, nothing will go to landfill. So that we try and get some very, very simple messages which enable people to understand that actually there are some choices at play, and that big institutions that seem immovable can do some small things that we hope will have impact. So public messages, detailed information for people who want help, and then creating some really important conversations in a safe place so that we can all move forward together.
it. Yeah.
And the conversations that we're having with our audience as well are important. Contrary to France's, we don't own any of the theatres that we tour into. So we have the added challenge that we need to have the conversations with our hosting theatres and the audiences that they look after as well. But in Leeds particularly, which is our main performing space, we are able to data capture through our ticketing system, and we are beginning those conversations with them about how they are touring into the theatre themselves. And we're indeed engaging the University of Leeds on some research projects for us in terms of analysing where they come from, and people like here in London travel a long distance from the north of Yorkshire down to us in Leeds, or from the Midlands up to Leeds. So these are the conversations that we're beginning to have, but also the creative projects that I spoke about a little earlier, again, create conversations with our audience. We have what I think is a very good start to information on our website. It's a full page and sub-pages on sustainability, our actions so far, and our pledges that we're making for the next 5 years.
Excellent, thank you. I've been signaled to that it's a wrap, so I can't take any more questions, but I just wanted to leave with 2 final comments, very briefly, 30 seconds short, from Chiara and Francis. Do you want to go first, and I'll come back to you at the end? I don't want to put you in the spot. If you don't want to say anything, don't worry.
No, I mean, I think I'd just like to repeat what I said just as part of my opening statement, and I think really picking up on what everyone on this panel has said. I mean, again, we can look at this task as incredibly daunting, or we can take it on with the kind of creativity and the kind of energy that it requires, because it absolutely does have to be central to everything that we do from here on out. And yeah, we can either rail against that, or we can embrace it. And when we embrace it, that's when really exciting and beautiful things start to happen.
Thank you.
All I want to do actually just is really second that, and to remind us all of the great John Berger, who said that, you know, in times of real darkness, hope is a form of energy. And today has been full of energy, and that's hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a wrap. And for those who had questions, I think the panel will be around loitering. Please find them, ask them questions. Thank you so much.